A millionaire lost in a poor neighborhood during a cold rain witnesses a heartbreaking scene, a soaked 7-year-old girl begging passers-by for food, cruelly ignored by everyone. Moved with compassion, he hands her $100 bill and she, eyes shining with gratitude, offers to guide him to his business destination. But when they arrive and he asks, "Where's your home?" she proudly points to a soaked cardboard box and says, "We're here, uncle." When she innocently offers to find another little box so he can stay dry too, his heart completely shatters. The rain hammered against the windshield of the black Mercedes with an insistence that seemed to echo the growing anxiety in Charles Albright's chest. His hands, accustomed to holding multi-million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly on the steering wheel as he surveyed the narrow, unfamiliar streets of the rundown, industrial neighborhood. The smell of wet asphalt invaded the car through the vents, mixing with the expensive cologne from his Italian suit, a contrast that did not escape his restless mind. "How the hell did I end up here?" he muttered to himself, checking the address scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper one more time. The meeting with Ricardo Mendoza, the developer who promised to revolutionize his real estate investments, was supposed to happen in 40 minutes, but his GPS had died 3 blocks ago, leaving him completely lost in this urban labyrinth. Charles had always prided himself on his ability to navigate the business world with surgical precision, but here, surrounded by modest houses and unmarked streets, he felt like a lost child. The rain intensified, turning the drops into a hard drum roll against the car's metal frame. He slowed down, looking for anyone who might help, when his eyes locked onto a scene that made his heart clench. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, was standing under a broken awning. Her soaked clothes clung to her thin body like a second skin, and her matted brown hair, plastered to her face, couldn't hide the large, sad eyes that silently pleaded with passers-by. With one hand outstretched and a voice nearly inaudible in the downpour, she asked for food from every person who passed. Charles's heart broke as he watched the coldness of the people. A man in a suit skirted around her as if she were contagious. A woman with an umbrella muttered something unpleasant and quickened her pace. A young couple simply ignored her, talking loudly about their dinner plans. The human indifference to a child's suffering was a cruelty he had never witnessed so up close. Without a second thought, Charles pulled over and got out, immediately feeling the cold rain soak through his expensive suit. He walked toward the girl, who watched him with a mixture of hope and fear. Her eyes, despite their sadness, shone with a surprising intelligence for someone so young. "Hey there, little one," he said, crouching to meet her gaze. "Are you hungry?" The question left his heart before his mind could fully process it. The girl nodded timidly, wiping her nose with a wet sleeve. "A lot, mister. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Charles felt a knot in his throat. He pulled a $100 bill from his wallet and handed it to the child, who received it with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Buy plenty of food, okay? And something to keep you warm." "Thank you, mister. Thank you," she exclaimed carefully, tucking the money into a ripped pocket. "You're an angel." "I need some information," Charles said, showing her the paper with the address. "Do you know this place?" The girl studied the paper carefully, frowning as if solving a complex problem. When she looked up, there was something different in her expression, a shadow of worry that didn't belong on a child's face. "I know it, mister. It's real close to here." She hesitated for a moment, biting her lower lip. "But are you sure you want to find that man? He's a very bad person. He messes with the wrong things and hurts people who don't obey." The child's words hit Charles like a lightning bolt. How could a street kid know Ricardo Mendoza, and why did she speak of him with such fear? "How do you know this man?" he asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "Everyone around here knows him, mister. My grandma always told me to hide when he shows up." The girl glanced around nervously. "Do you really want me to take you there?" Charles was facing a choice that would change his life forever, though he didn't know it yet. The girl's question echoed in Charles's mind like an alarm bell. His years in business had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every fiber of his being was screaming that something was wrong. He studied the child's angelic face, searching for signs of a lie or manipulation, but found only pure sincerity and genuine concern. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, buying time to process the disturbing information. "Caroline, mister, but everyone calls me Carol." She wiped away tears mixed with the rain streaming down her face. "And you?" "Charles." "Caroline is a beautiful name." He smiled, trying to calm her. "Is your grandmother nearby?" The girl's timid smile vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of deep pain that broke the businessman's heart. She shook her head, wiping her nose on her soaked sleeve. "Grandma Elaine has been in the hospital for 3 months, mister. The doctors said she needs a really expensive operation, but we don't have the money." Caroline's voice trembled. "And not just from the cold. That's why I'm out here asking for help. I need to get enough money to save her." Charles felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The reality of urban poverty, which had always been a distant statistic in his corporate reports, now had a face, a name, and real tears before him. How had he lived 45 years without truly seeing this pain? "And where do you live, Caroline?" The question came out in a whisper, though he dreaded the answer. "The far." Girl pointed to a large cardboard box under the broken awning, only partially shielded from the rain that was now falling harder. The box was soaked at the edges, and Charles could see a few wet clothes and a thin blanket piled in a corner. "There, mister. I've been living in the box for 4 months. It was hard at first, but I'm used to it now." Caroline spoke, with a matter-of-factness that horrified Charles. "The men from the group home want to take me, but I don't like it there. They're mean and do bad things to the kids. I'd rather be free out here on the street." The child's words hit Charles like an emotional avalanche. His privileged mind struggled to comprehend how such a small child could survive on the streets, sleeping in a cardboard box, running from institutions that were supposed to protect her. He had always believed the system worked, that there were safety nets for cases like this. "Caroline, you said you know the man at this address. How?" he insisted, showing her the wet paper again. The girl looked around nervously before moving closer to him, whispering as if sharing a dangerous secret. "He comes here every week, mister. He talks to the men who run the street kids. They take some of the boys and girls away, and we never see them again." Her eyes filled with tears. "My friend Julia left with them 2 months ago. She cried a lot and said she didn't want to go, but they took her anyway." Charles's blood ran cold. The implications of Caroline's innocent words painted a dark picture he didn't want to accept. Ricardo Mendoza, the respectable developer, who promised to revolutionize his investments, was involved in child exploitation. And the police, don't they help you? He asked, desperately searching for a logical explanation. Caroline let out a sad little laugh that sounded terribly adult coming from someone so young. "The cops talk to that man too, mister. They get paid to look the other way. My grandma always said that when adults have a lot of money, they can make people forget what's right and wrong." The rain kept falling, but Charles no longer felt the cold. A deep, righteous anger began to boil in his chest. How had he been so naive? How had he not seen the signs? His company, his name, his reputation. Everything was about to be stained by an association with someone who preyed on vulnerable children. "Caroline," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever, "do you want to get out of the rain? I can take you to get something warm to eat." The girl's eyes lit up with hope, but also with caution. You're Not going to hand me over to the bad men, are you? Caroline's innocent question struck Charles to his very core. In the girl's eyes, he saw decades of premature distrust, the bitter wisdom of someone who had learned far too early that not all adults have good intentions. How could a 7-year-old child already carry so much fear and experience with human cruelty? I would never do that to you, Caroline. I promise. The words came out with a conviction he hadn't expected to feel. Do you trust me? The girl studied his face for a long moment, as if she could read his soul through his eyes. Finally, she nodded slowly. Grandma Elaine always said I should look deep into people's eyes. She said the eyes can't lie. Caroline wiped her wet nose. Your eyes are kind, Mr. Charles. Something shifted in Charles's chest, a warm feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Maybe it was compassion. Maybe it was the awakening of a paternal instinct he'd never had the chance to exercise. His relationships had always been superficial, focused on professional achievements and accumulating wealth. He had never stopped to think about the emotional void it had created in his life. Then let's get out of this rain, he said, taking Caroline's small, cold hand. I know a place that serves the best hot chocolate in the city. He walked her to the car, opening the passenger door. Caroline hesitated on the threshold, looking at the luxurious interior with a mixture of awe and suspicion. It's so pretty, mister. I've never been in a car like this. She carefully touched the leather seat. I'm not going to get it dirty, am I? Don't worry about that, little one. Get in, let's get warm. As Caroline settled into the seat, Charles turned the heater on full blast and grabbed a blanket he kept in the trunk. The girl wrapped herself in it like a cocoon, sighing with relief as she felt the warmth envelop her chilled body. Mr. Charles, she said after a few minutes, you're not going to meet that bad man anymore, are you? The question made him reflect on the situation he was in. The meeting with Ricardo Mendoza was crucial for his business expansion. Plans. The contract could mean millions in profits and the definitive establishment of his company in the international market. But how could he move forward, knowing what he knew now? No, Caroline. I'm not going to meet with him. The decision came naturally, without the cold analysis he usually applied to business matters. There are things more important than money. Caroline's eyes lit up. Grandma always said that. She said money can buy food and medicine, but it can't buy family or love. As he drove through the streets toward the city center, Charles couldn't stop thinking about the simple wisdom of this abandoned child. His entire life had been built on the premise that financial success was synonymous with happiness. But here, next to a girl who had nothing but her own dignity, he was beginning to question everything. Caroline, tell me more about your grandmother. What's she like? The girl's face lit up for the first time since they had met. Oh, Mr. Grandma Elaine is the best person in the world. She took care of me since I was a baby, after my mom left. She used to sell sweets in the park and always saved the best one for me. And is she really sick? Yes, mister. She collapsed on the street 3 months ago and hasn't really woken up since. The doctors said it's her heart, that it's very tired. They said she needs an operation that costs a lot of money, more money than we could save in 100 years. Charles felt a pang of pain in his chest. For him, the cost of the surgery was probably equivalent to what he spent on a single fancy dinner. The social disparity had never been so stark and painful. Which hospital is she in, Caroline? St. Vincent's Hospital, mister. It's far from here. I tried to visit her a few times, but the guards don't let kids in alone, and I don't. Have a grown-up to go with me. When they arrived at the coffee shop, Charles watched Caroline devour a bowl of soup as if it were the last meal of her life. The girl ate slowly, savoring each spoonful, and occasionally tucked a piece of bread into her pocket. For Grandma, she explained, noticing his gaze. When she gets better, I want to give her something nice. In that moment, Charles knew his life had changed forever. There was no going back. The afternoon turned into evening as Charles and Caroline remained in the cozy coffee shop. The girl had finished her third cup of hot chocolate and was now watching the city's hustle and bustle through the fogged-up window, fascinated. To her, accustomed only to the streets of the city's outskirts, downtown seemed like a completely different world, full of lights and possibilities. "Mr. Charles," she said, resting her chin on her small hands, "why do some people have so much and others have nothing?" The philosophical question from a 7-year-old left Charles speechless for a moment. How could he explain the complexities of social inequality to someone who lived it every day? "That's a very hard question, Caroline. I think sometimes people forget to take care of each other." He hesitated, searching for simple words. "But you know what I learned today?" "What, mister?" "That meeting you made me remember what's really important in life." Caroline smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed her tired face. "Grandma always said God puts the right people in our path at the right time. Maybe you're my guardian angel in disguise." As she spoke, Charles's phone buzzed insistently. It was Ricardo Mendoza. The businessman looked at the screen, feeling a mixture of disgust and anger. How had he been so blind? How had he not noticed the signs during the months of negotiation? "Aren't you going to answer, mister?" Caroline asked, noticing his hesitation. "No, I don't want to talk to that person." Charles silenced the phone and put it in his pocket. "Caroline, I need to ask you something important. Do you have a safe place to sleep tonight?" The girl looked down, nervously fidgeting with the edge of the blanket still wrapped around her. "There's a lady named Mrs. Rosa who sometimes lets me sleep on her porch when it's really cold. But she lives far away, and by the time I get there, sometimes she's already locked up and doesn't hear me." Charles' heart broke all over again. The thought of Caroline returning to that soaked cardboard box, or worse, sleeping in the open on a cold night like this, was intolerable. "What if you came to my house tonight? I have a guest room that's been empty for years. You could take a hot bath, sleep in a real bed." Caroline's eyes widened, but they also filled with tears. "You'd really do that for me, mister, even without knowing me?" "I would, little one. In fact, I am," Charles smiled. "But only if you want to. I don't want you to feel forced." Caroline nodded vigorously, wiping the tears that streamed down her face. "I want to, mister. It's been so long since I slept in a bed. The last time was at Grandma's, before she got sick." During the drive to Charles's mansion, Caroline was silent, absorbing the urban landscape as it gradually shifted from commercial buildings to affluent residential neighborhoods. When they arrived at the electronic gate of his house, she let out a gasp of astonishment. "Wow, mister, it's a palace. Do you live all alone in such a big house?" "I do. It's too big for one person, isn't it?" For the first time, Charles saw his house through someone else's eyes and realized how absurd it was to live alone in so much space. Inside the house, Caroline walked slowly through the rooms, carefully touching the furniture as if it were fragile artwork. In the living room, she stopped in front of a photo of Charles receiving a business award. "You're very important, aren't you, mister?" she asked, impressed. "People say so. But today I discovered that real importance is something else." He knelt beside her. "Come on, I'll show you your room." The guest room was larger than the entire area where Caroline used to live on the street. She walked through the suite, touching everything with reverence. The king-size bed, the silk curtains, the bathroom with its marble tub. "Can I really sleep here, Mr. Charles?" "You can. And tomorrow we're going to take care of some important things." "What things?" she asked, taking off her wet shoes. "First, we're going to visit your grandmother at the hospital. Then we're going to talk to the doctors about her surgery." Caroline ran to him and hugged him tightly, as if he were a father she hadn't seen in a long time. Thank you, mister. Thank you for not abandoning me like everyone else does. In that hug, Charles felt he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a true purpose for his life. The next morning brought a timid sun that struggled to break through the clouds still heavy from the previous day's rain. Charles woke up early as usual, but for the first time in years, he didn't immediately think of spreadsheets or meetings. His thoughts were focused on the girl sleeping in the room next door and the promise he had made the night before. Caroline woke up startled, taking a few seconds to remember where she was. When reality set in, a smile lit up her face. She had slept in a real bed with clean sheets and soft pillows. It was as if she had stepped into a dream she never wanted to end. "Good morning, little one." Charles greeted her when she appeared in the kitchen, still wearing the previous day's clothes, but with her hair combed and her face washed. "Did you sleep well?" "It was the best night of my life, Mr. Charles." Caroline sat at the table, gazing in wonder at the breakfast he had prepared. Fresh bread, fruit, juices, and scrambled eggs. "Is this all for me?" "Of course it is. Eat up because we have a big day ahead of us." While Caroline savored every bite as if it were a royal banquet, Charles explained the plan for the day. First, they would go to the mall to buy her some proper clothes. Then they would head to St. Vincent's Hospital to visit Grandma Elaine. At the mall, Caroline froze in front of the sheer number of options. She had never been in a place like it, with so many stores, lights, and well-dressed people. She held tightly to Charles's hand, afraid of getting lost in this unknown world. "Pick whatever you want, Caroline. You need new clothes." "But it's so expensive, mister. Grandma always said we should only spend money on what we really need." "Your grandmother is a wise woman, but you need clothes, so it's not a waste." Charles smiled. "Besides, I want you to feel pretty and comfortable." Caroline chose only the essentials: 2 simple outfits, new shoes, and a warm coat. She refused to take more despite Charles's insistence. "This is already more than I ever dreamed of having, mister." The drive to the hospital was marked by Caroline's growing anxiety. She hadn't seen her grandmother in almost a week since the last time she had tried to enter the hospital and been stopped by security. Her small hands trembled as she clung to the car seat. "What if Grandma doesn't recognize me, Mr. Charles? What if she's really, really sick?" "It doesn't matter how she is, Caroline. The important thing is that you'll be together again." Charles took her hand, trying to convey a sense of calm. "And we're going to find out exactly what she needs to get better." At the hospital, the receptionist directed them to the 5th floor, the cardiology wing. The hallway was long and cold, with that characteristic hospital smell that made Caroline wrinkle her nose. When they reached room 512, she hesitated at the door. "You can go in, little one. She's waiting for you." Mrs. Elaine was lying in bed, connected to several machines that emitted rhythmic beeps. Despite her pallor and evident fragility, her eyes lit up when she saw Caroline. The girl ran to the bed, careful not to bump into the wires and tubes. "Grandma! Grandma Elaine! I brought help!" Caroline held the elderly woman's hand gently. "This is Mr. Charles. He's very kind, and he's going to help us." Mrs. Elaine looked at Charles with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Her eyes, though tired, held the sharpness of someone who had lived a long time and learned to read people. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Elaine. Caroline has told me a lot about you." Charles approached respectfully. "I came to see how I can help." "My granddaughter is all I have in this world, young man. If your intentions are good, may God bless you. If they're not..." Her weak voice carried surprising strength. "A grandmother always knows how to protect her child, even from a hospital bed." The doctor who entered the room interrupted the tense conversation. Dr. Martinez was a middle-aged man with the weary expression of someone who had seen too much suffering. "You must be the one responsible for the patient," he said, addressing Charles. We need to talk about Mrs. Elaine's condition. Is she going to be okay, doctor? Caroline asked, clutching the doctor's lab coat. Dr. Martinez hesitated, looking from Caroline to Charles, clearly uncomfortable. It's a complex situation, little one. Something in the doctor's tone alerted Charles. There was more to Mrs. Elaine's story than it seemed. Dr. Martinez led Charles into the hallway, leaving Caroline by her grandmother's side. The doctor seemed to carry the weight of information he would rather not share, his eyes avoiding direct contact as he nervously flipped through the medical chart. Mister, he began, waiting for an introduction. Charles Albright. I'm a friend of the family. The hesitation in his own definition surprised him. What was he to Caroline and Mrs. Elaine, a stranger who had appeared less than 24 hours ago, but already felt deeply connected to them both? Mr. Albright, Mrs. Elaine's situation is critical. She does need urgent cardiac surgery, but Dr. Martinez lowered his voice, glancing nervously down the hall. There are some irregularities that concern me. What kind of irregularities? Her admission was paid for by a charitable organization I've never seen before. They cover all the basic costs, but they refuse to authorize the surgery. The doctor paused, as if struggling with how much he should reveal. And there's something else. I get weekly phone calls asking about the patient's granddaughter, asking if she's shown up for a visit. Charles's blood ran cold. Caroline's words about men taking children away echoed in his mind like alarm sirens. Who's making these calls? They claim to be from social services, but something doesn't add up. Real social workers don't ask those kinds of questions over the phone. Dr. Martinez looked directly at Charles for the first time. Mr. Albright, I've worked at this hospital for 15 years. I've seen a lot of strange things, but this case, it has the stench of something very wrong. What do you suspect? I think they're using Mrs. Elaine as bait, keeping her alive, just long enough to lure the girl in, but without actually curing her. The doctor lowered his voice even further, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only employee here who's received specific instructions about this case. Charles felt a cold rage settle in his chest. The picture was becoming clearer and more terrifying. Ricardo Mendoza and his organization not only exploited street kids, but also used hospitalized family members as a form of emotional blackmail. Doctor, if I wanted to pay for Mrs. Elaine's surgery, could it be done today? Technically, yes, but Dr. Martinez hesitated again. Mr. Albright, if you do this, you'll be interfering with something much bigger and more dangerous. These people don't like it when their plans are disrupted. Leave that to me. How much is the surgery? When Dr. Martinez told him the amount, Charles almost laughed. It was a sum he'd spend without a thought on business dinners. For Mrs. Elaine and Caroline, it represented the difference between life and death, hope and despair. I'll wire the money right now. When can you operate? If all goes well, tomorrow morning. But Mr. Albright, you don't understand. When they find out Mrs. Elaine was operated on without their authorization, they'll come after Caroline. Charles finished the thought, his mind already racing for solutions. That's why she needs to stay hidden until we sort this out. Back in the room, Caroline was humming a soft lullaby to her grandmother, who was smiling weakly. The scene touched Charles's heart deeply. This was what truly mattered in life. Unconditional love, mutual care, a real family. Caroline, he called softly. I need to talk to you and your grandmother about something important. The girl turned, and in her eyes he saw the sharp intelligence he had come to recognize. It's about the bad men, isn't it, Mr. Charles? How did you know? I saw the way the doctor looked around before he talked to you. My grandma taught me to pay attention to how grown-ups act when they're scared. Caroline held her grandmother's hand. They're using Grandma to get me, aren't they? Mrs. Elaine squeezed her granddaughter's hand weakly. "I knew something was wrong, my little one. Nobody pays for an expensive hospital stay just out of kindness." "But that's all about to change," Charles said, kneeling by the bed. "I'm paying for your grandmother's surgery, Caroline. She's going to get well." "And then what?" Mrs. Elaine asked, her eyes fixed on Charles. "What happens to my granddaughter when they find out their plans have been ruined?" The question hung in the air like a dark omen. Mrs. Elaine's surgery was scheduled for 6 the next morning. Charles had been up all night, drawing up plans to protect Caroline while she slept peacefully in the guest room. For the first time in his life, he felt truly responsible for another person, and the weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and gratifying. At 5:30 in the morning, he was helping Caroline get dressed when the house's intercom buzzed insistently. No visitors were expected at this hour, and a shiver ran down his spine as he imagined who it could be. "Stay here in the room, Caroline. Don't come out for any reason, understand?" His voice tried to sound calm, but the girl, with her sharp perception, immediately caught the tension. "It's them, isn't it, Mr. Charles?" she asked, her eyes filling with fear. "They found out where I am." Before he could answer, the sound of shattering glass echoed from downstairs. These weren't polite visitors ringing the intercom. Someone had broken into his house. "Come on, quick!" Charles scooped Caroline into his arms and ran to his own bedroom, which had an exit to a balcony with an emergency ladder. "We have to get out of here now." As they climbed down the ladder, Caroline whispered in his ear, "Mister, I know something they don't know I know." "What's that, little one?" "Yesterday, when we got home, I saw a car just like the one that's always near Grandma's hospital. They were already following us." The revelation hit Charles like a bolt of lightning. If they had been watched since yesterday, it meant his decision to pay for the surgery had been discovered very quickly. Someone at the hospital was feeding the criminals information about their every move. They reached the car in the garage undetected, but when Charles tried to start the engine, nothing happened. Someone had sabotaged the vehicle. They were trapped. "Mr. Charles Albright," a familiar voice echoed through the garage. Ricardo Mendoza emerged from the shadows, flanked by 2 large men in dark suits. "What an unpleasant surprise to find you here with our little Caroline." "I knew you. We're bad." Caroline hid behind Charles, but her voice held a courage that impressed everyone present. "My grandma always said bad people have cold eyes, and yours are like ice." Mendoza laughed, an ugly sound that ricocheted through the garage. "The girl is smart, a pity that makes her even more valuable for our purposes." "What purposes?" Charles asked, placing himself protectively in front of Caroline. "Oh, my dear Charles, did you really think our meeting yesterday was about real estate?" Mendoza approached slowly. "It was about something far more profitable. Smart children like Caroline are perfect for our business of special adoptions." Special adoptions. Wealthy families in other countries pay a fortune for bright American children, especially those who already know how to survive on their own. Mendoza's smile was predatory. Caroline would be perfect for a family in Asia with specific needs. The horror of the situation hit Charles full force. This wasn't just local exploitation, it was international human trafficking, and he had inadvertently stumbled into the middle of an operation that likely moved millions of dollars. "But you've complicated our plans, Charles. First you cancelled our meeting, then you interfered at the hospital. That was very reckless." "Leave Mr. Charles alone," Caroline yelled, stepping out from behind him. "He was just trying to help. You're the bad guys." "Actually, my dear, your Mr. Charles is going to help us now," Mendoza signaled to his goons. "You see, Charles, your company has a sterling reputation and the international connections we need to expand our business. You can choose. Be our willing partner or what? or watch Caroline disappear forever while you face charges of kidnapping and child endangerment. We have very convincing evidence that you took a child off the street and kept her in your home. Without legal authorization, Charles saw the perfect trap. They had turned his compassion into a weapon against him. Any attempt to expose the organization would be neutralized by the fabricated evidence of his own crimes. You have until tomorrow to decide, Charles. The grandmother's surgery will be cancelled, of course, and Caroline will return to where she belongs, under our protection. I'll never go with you, Caroline shouted. I'd rather live on the street forever. Oh, my dear, Mendoza crouched to her level. You don't have a choice. Neither of you do. When the men were gone, leaving Charles and Caroline alone in the garage, the silence was deafening. The raw reality of the situation hung over them like a storm about to break. Mr. Charles, Caroline whispered, are we going to be able to save Grandma? Looking into those trusting eyes, Charles knew he had only one choice to make: fight. In the hours that followed the invasion, Charles turned his house into a makeshift fortress. He locked all the doors, drew the curtains, and activated the most advanced security system money could buy. But he knew it was only a temporary measure. Mendoza and his organization had resources and connections that made any conventional hiding place useless. Caroline sat on the living room sofa, watching Charles pace like a caged animal. Despite the fear evident in her eyes, the girl maintained a surprising calm for someone her age. Mr. Charles, she said finally, stop walking. You're making me dizzy. Sorry, little one, I'm trying to think of a way out of this. He sat beside her, running his hands through his hair in despair. How could I have been so naive? How did I not see it was a trap? Grandma always said that good people can't imagine how bad people think. That's not a flaw, mister. It's because you have a clean heart. Caroline's simple wisdom once again struck a deep chord with Charles. How could a child who had lived on the streets maintain such purity of spirit? Caroline, I need to tell you something. Last night, they looked up this Ricardo Mendoza online. Charles hesitated, not wanting to frighten her more than she already was. He's not just a local criminal. He has international connections, shell companies in several countries. That's why he wants to use your company, right? Caroline interrupted, showing an understanding of the situation that surprised him. People like him need people like you to look respectable. Exactly. And if I don't cooperate, they'll hurt Grandma and me, Caroline finished, the sentence without emotion, as if simply stating a fact. But Mr. Charles, I have an idea. What kind of idea? On the streets, you learn that sometimes the only way to beat someone stronger is to use their own strength against them. Caroline stood up, walking to the window. What if we make them think they've won? Charles frowned, trying to follow the girl's reasoning. What do you mean? What if you pretend you're going to be their partner? They'll let their guard down, and we could find out everything about the organization. Caroline turned to him, her eyes shining with an intelligence that had long since surpassed her chronological age. On the street, I'd always pretend I was going to obey the bad men, but really I was paying attention to everything so I could escape later. Caroline's suggestion was risky, but it had a perverse logic that made sense. If Charles feigned cooperation, he could gain access to the organization's inner workings and potentially find the evidence to destroy it. It's too dangerous, Caroline. If they suspect anything, they won't if we do it right. The girl sat next to him again. Mister, you know important people, right? Cops, judges, people like that? A few, yes. Why? Because we're going to need real help when the time comes. People who can't be bought like the cops in my neighborhood. Charles realized Caroline was right. His network of business contacts included some people in positions of power whom he believed to be incorruptible. It might be possible to mount an operation to expose Mendoza, but he would have to be extremely careful. And there's one more thing, Mr. Charles. Caroline lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. I know where they keep the other kids. How do you know that? Because my friend Julia, the one they took, managed to get a message to me before she disappeared. She wrote it on a little piece of paper and threw it out the window when they drove past the park where I used to stay. Caroline ran to the bedroom and came back with a small, crumpled piece of paper she had kept in the pocket of her old clothes. Carefully, she smoothed it out on the coffee table. The childish handwriting was faded but still legible. Carol, Blue Warehouse near the abandoned factory. Lots of kids, help me. She's asking for help, Charles murmured, feeling the weight of responsibility grow even heavier. This isn't just about you and your grandmother, Caroline. There are other children suffering. I know, mister. That's why we have to be brave and smart at the same time. Caroline carefully folded the paper. Julia trusted me. I can't abandon her or the others. At that moment, Charles's phone rang. It was Mendoza. So, my dear Charles, have you considered my proposal? Charles looked at Caroline, who nodded encouragingly. I'm willing to talk, but I have conditions. Ah, how interesting. And what might those be? I want to see the kind of operation you're running. If I'm going to risk my reputation, I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Very sensible of you. Tomorrow night at 8. I'll send the address. When he hung up, Charles felt as if he had just signed a pact with the devil. But looking at Caroline, he knew he had no other choice. The war had begun. The address Mendoza sent led to an industrial warehouse in the Port District, an area known for its lack of police presence and abundance of questionable activities. Charles drove in silence, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel as he mentally rehearsed the plan he and Caroline had devised. Caroline was hidden on the back floor covered by a dark blanket. The plan was risky. She would secretly enter the facility to locate the other children, while Charles kept Mendoza busy with the fake negotiations. It was a plan that hinged on the courage and intelligence of a 7-year-old girl, and that terrified. Charles, remember the rules, Caroline, he whispered, checking the rearview mirror. I stay hidden, I watch everything, I don't make a sound, and if anything goes wrong, I run to the meeting point we picked out. Her voice came muffled from under the blanket. Mr. Charles, what if they figure you out? They won't. I'm going to give the performance of a lifetime. Charles tried to sound more confident than he felt. And you're going to be my little spy. They arrived at the location at 8 o'clock sharp. The warehouse was immense, with broken windows and peeling walls that told stories of neglect. Several expensive cars were parked outside, suggesting the meeting involved more people than just Mendoza. Charles parked the car in a strategic position that would allow Caroline to slip out through the back of the warehouse unseen. Now, little one, good luck. Good luck to you too, mister. Remember, look interested, but not too eager. As Charles headed for the main entrance, Caroline silently slipped out the back door and crept into the shadows. Her street survival skills had never been more necessary. Inside the warehouse, Charles found an operation far more sophisticated than he had imagined. The space was divided into several sections, a makeshift office area, a section that looked like a dormitory, and in the back, an isolated area from which came the muffled sounds of children's voices. Mendoza greeted him with a false smile, flanked by 3 other men in expensive suits. Charles, welcome to our little enterprise. I'd like you to meet our partners. The introductions were made with the formality of a legitimate business meeting, which made it all the more disturbing. There was a lawyer, an accountant, and someone who identified himself only as an international logistics specialist. Impressive, Charles commented, forcing admiration into his voice. You've really set up a professional operation. Ah, my friend, this is just the beginning. Care to see our current inventory? Charles felt his stomach churn at the word inventory, but he nodded. He followed Mendoza to the isolated area where his worst nightmare was confirmed. There were about 15 children, between 6 and 12 years old, all wearing clean but simple clothes, sitting on mattresses on the floor. Some were playing. Quietly, others just stared into space with empty expressions. All orphans or abandoned, Mendoza explained casually. We rescue them from the streets, offer them food, shelter, a basic education. It's practically a social service. And then we find them loving families in other countries who can offer them opportunities they would never have here in the States. Mendoza's cynicism was nauseating. Of course, these families pay handsomely for the opportunity to do a good deed. Meanwhile, Caroline had found a broken window at the back of the warehouse and managed to slip inside undetected. Hiding behind stacked boxes, she could see and hear everything. Her heart pounded when she recognized Julia among the children. Her friend was there, alive, but visibly thinner and with sad eyes. Caroline observed the facility's routine, noting where the guards were stationed, how the children were monitored, and what the entry and exit points were. Her survivor's mind catalogued every detail that could be useful in a potential rescue operation. "And what about the paperwork?" Charles asked, forcing himself to maintain a professional tone while fighting back nausea. "Ah, that's our friend's specialty," Mendoza pointed to, the lawyer. "He has contacts in government agencies and county offices. We can procure completely legal documentation for all the adoptions." Completely legal obviously meant completely forged. But Charles just nodded as if impressed by the operation's efficiency. "And what exactly would my role be in all this? Your company has import-export contracts with several Asian countries, correct? We need those trade routes to facilitate the transport of the children." Mendoza smiled coldly. "And your impeccable reputation would give us the credibility we need to expand operations." Caroline, still hidden, overheard a conversation between two guards that made her blood run cold. They were talking about a special shipment scheduled for the following week when 10 children would be sent to premium clients in Asia. "And what's in it for me?" Charles asked, hating himself for asking the question. 10% of every transaction, considering each child is worth between $50,000 and $100,000. Mendoza let the math speak for itself. "It's a tempting offer," Charles said, making a great effort to sound interested. "But I need assurances. How do I know I won't be incriminated if something goes wrong?" "My dear Charles, you're already incriminated. Remember little Caroline sleeping at your house?" Mendoza's predatory smile confirmed what Charles already knew. There was no easy way out of this situation. Caroline remained hidden for another 20 minutes, absorbing every detail of the criminal operation. She observed the guards' schedules, the children's routine, and most importantly, discovered where the keys to the transport vehicles were kept. Her young mind, sharpened by the need to survive, mentally drafted a complete map of the location. Meanwhile, Charles continued his performance, feigning growing interest in the proposal. "Mendoza, I appreciate the confidence, but I need to better understand the logistics. How do you ensure the children arrive at their destinations in good condition?" That's the most delicate part. Mendoza led Charles to another section of the warehouse where there was a kind of makeshift infirmary. "We have basic medical care, medication to keep the children calm during long journeys, and of course, behavioral training." Behavioral training. They need to learn to behave properly for their new families. Some arrive here very rebellious, accustomed to the freedom of the streets. Mendoza's casual tone as he spoke of breaking the children's spirits made Charles clench his fists discreetly. "But our methods are very effective." Caroline, still hidden, saw Julia being led by a man to the infirmary. Her friend seemed sedated, walking with slow movements and a vacant gaze. The sight made her understand with horror what medication to keep the children calm meant. "And how long does this training take?" Charles asked, struggling to keep his voice neutral. "Depends on the child. Some adapt in a few weeks, others—" Mendoza shrugged. "Well, not all are suitable for all types of clients. We have different categories of adoptive families with different needs." The subtext in Mendoza's words was clear and repugnant. Charles realized he was dealing with something far worse than simple human trafficking. It was an operation that categorized children as commodities to satisfy the most sordid desires of wealthy people around the world. Caroline managed to get closer to the area where Julia had been taken. Through a crack in the wall, she saw her friend lying on a cot, clearly under the influence of drugs. A man in a white lab coat was making notes on a clipboard, treating the girl like an object being prepared for sale. "Julia," Caroline whispered, almost inaudibly. To her surprise, Julia turned her head slightly toward the voice. Her eyes were glazed over, but there was still a flicker of recognition. "Carol?" Julia murmured, fighting the effects of the medication. You came for me?" "I'm going to get you out of here, Ju. I'm going to get all of you out," Caroline promised, feeling tears burn her eyes. "Just hang on, okay?" At that moment, Caroline heard footsteps approaching. She quickly hid behind a stack of medical equipment, watching two men enter the infirmary. "The girl is responding well to the new protocol," said the man in the lab coat. "She'll be ready for shipment next week." "Excellent. The Asian client pays extra for children of this specific age." The other man checked something on a tablet. "And what about the old woman's surgery at the hospital?" "Cancelled, as ordered. The doctor received his instructions." Caroline felt her world crumble around her. Grandma Elaine's surgery had been cancelled. All her efforts, all the hope she had placed in Charles, it had all been for nothing. Meanwhile, in the main area of the warehouse, Mendoza was concluding his presentation to Charles. "So, my friend, are you convinced of the viability of our enterprise?" "Very impressed," Charles lied, feeling physically ill. "When would our partnership begin?" "Immediately. In fact, we have a special shipment next week that would be perfect for testing our collaboration." Mendoza smiled maliciously. "And little Caroline would be an excellent addition to that cargo." "Caroline? Come now, you didn't think you could just keep her forever, did you? She's already caused enough trouble. It's time she became productive." Mendoza's mask of civility fell away completely, revealing the calculating coldness behind the entire operation. Caroline wasn't just a potential victim. She was a commodity he planned to sell, regardless of Charles's cooperation. "I see," Charles said, forcing a smile. "When do you need a final answer?" "By noon tomorrow. After that, we'll proceed with or without your cooperation. But of course, it would be much more convenient for everyone if you were reasonable." As Charles prepared to leave, Caroline found a moment to escape the warehouse. She ran silently to the car, where she hid again on the back floor. When Charles got into the vehicle, she was trembling, not from cold, but from rage and determination. "Mr. Charles," she whispered, as soon as they were away from the site. "They cancelled Grandma's surgery." The words hit Charles like a punch to the gut. "How do you know?" "I heard them, and there's more. They're going to ship Julia and the other kids out next week." Caroline sat up, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. "And they want me with them." "That's not going to happen, Caroline. I promise." "I know, mister, because we're not going to let them." The girl's voice carried a conviction that stunned Charles. "It's time we stopped running and started fighting back." Charles looked in the rearview mirror at those determined eyes and knew the girl was right. The time for defensive strategies was over. Back at the house, Charles and Caroline turned the living room into a makeshift command center. Papers spread across the coffee table showed the map of the warehouse that Caroline had drawn from memory, with an accuracy that was astonishing for a child her age. Every detail was carefully noted: guard locations, shift change times, escape routes, and most importantly, where exactly the children were being held. "Mr. Charles, we need help," Caroline said, pointing to the drawing. "There are too many armed men, and they're not just going to let us walk in and leave with the kids." Charles agreed, having already reached the same conclusion. "I have some contacts who might help, but I need to be sure I can trust them. If Mendoza was able to corrupt people at the hospital and the local police, what if we talk to the kids themselves first?" Caroline interrupted, her eyes bright with an idea. "They know the place better than any adult, and they know which guards are more relaxed, what times are easiest to slip away. How would we do that? I go back, alone this time?" Caroline spoke with a determination that frightened Charles. "I'll pretend I gave myself up, that I ran away from you because I was scared. Then I can talk to Julia and the others." "Absolutely not. It's far too risky, Caroline. Mister, I survived 4 months on the streets by myself. I know how to handle dangerous people." The girl took his hand. "And besides, if we don't do something, all those kids are going to disappear forever next week." Caroline's logic was irrefutable, but the thought of putting her in danger again was unbearable for Charles. He had developed a paternal love for her that he didn't know was possible to feel. "There is another way," he said finally. "I'm going to call someone I trust completely." Charles dialed a number he hadn't used in months. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice answered. "Detective Santiago." "Marina, it's Charles Albright. I need to speak with you urgently, and it can't be over the phone." Detective Marina Santiago was one of the few people in positions of power Charles knew personally and trusted completely. They had met years ago at a charity event, and she had always remained incorruptible despite the pressures of the system. 2 hours later, Marina arrived at Charles's house, accompanied by a man who introduced himself as FBI Special Agent Lucas Rodriguez. The detective was a woman in her 40s, with salt and pepper hair and piercing eyes that seemed capable of detecting a lie from a mile away. "Charles, you said this was about child trafficking. I hope you have solid evidence," Marina said, sitting down in the living room. "More than evidence. I have an eyewitness." Charles called for Caroline, who entered the room with the detailed map she had drawn. For the next 30 minutes, Caroline recounted everything she had seen and lived through, from her months on the streets to her infiltration of the warehouse the night before. Her narrative was clear, detailed, and devastatingly convincing. Marina and Lucas asked specific questions, and Caroline answered them all with a precision that impressed the seasoned officers. "This kid has a photographic memory and a detective's instincts," Lucas murmured to Marina. "And if half of what she's saying is true, it's all true," Caroline interrupted, having overheard the whisper. "And there's more. They talked about other warehouses in other cities. It's not just here in Chicago." The revelation made Marina and Lucas exchange worried glances. If Caroline was right, they weren't just dealing with a local operation, but a national human trafficking network. "Caroline," Marina said, crouching to meet the girl's gaze, "would you be able to guide us to this warehouse? Show us exactly where everything is?" "Of course, but..." Caroline hesitated, looking at Charles. "What about Grandma Elaine? They cancelled her surgery. If she doesn't have it soon..." "Leave that to us," Lucas said. "We have the authority to ensure any necessary medical treatment is performed immediately." "Really?" Caroline's eyes filled with hope for the first time in days. "Really? But we need to act fast. If this shipment is scheduled for next week..." Marina looked at Lucas. "How many agents can you mobilize discreetly? For an operation of this magnitude, 20, maybe 25. But it will have to be very well coordinated. Caroline raised her hand timidly. Can I make a suggestion? The three adults turned to her, waiting. What if we use the kids themselves to help with the operation? They know the place, they know how to hide, and they can create diversions when you need them. The suggestion was risky and unconventional, but it had a logic that couldn't be ignored. The children would have maximum motivation to cooperate and intimate knowledge of the location. It's risky, Marina said thoughtfully, but it could work. There's one more thing, Caroline added. I know a way into the warehouse without anyone seeing, and if everything goes right, I can warn the other kids before you arrive. Lucas shook his head. We can't put a child at risk like that. Agent Rodriguez. Caroline looked him directly in the eye. I'm already at risk. We all are. The difference is, now we have a chance to fight back. The silence that followed was broken by Charles. She's right. Caroline is no ordinary child. She's a survivor. Marina made the final decision. All right, we'll do it, but with every possible precaution. As they planned the details of the operation, no one noticed the black car parked across the street, nor the man observing the house with binoculars. The operation was set for the following morning before dawn. Caroline had insisted on being the first to enter the warehouse, 2 hours before the tactical team's arrival, to prepare the other children and create the necessary conditions for the rescue. Charles stayed up all night, alternating between checking the communication equipment and watching Caroline sleep peacefully, as if it were just another normal night. At 4 in the morning, Caroline woke up naturally, as she always did when something important was about to happen. She put on the dark clothes Charles had bought especially for the operation and pocketed a small transmitter that would allow the tactical team to monitor her movements. Do you remember everything we planned? Charles asked, kneeling in front of her. I go in through the back window, find Julia and the other kids, explain the plan, and wait for the signal for the diversion. Caroline recited the instructions like an experienced soldier. If anything goes wrong, I use the emergency exit I marked on the map. And if the guards catch you, I pretend I ran away from you and came to turn myself in. That'll buy time. Until you get here. Caroline hugged Charles tightly. Mister, if anything happens to me, nothing is going to happen, Charles interrupted, though his own voice trembled. You're going to come home. We'll get your grandma her surgery, and then we're going to be a real family. Promise? I promise. Marina and Lucas were in position 2 blocks from the warehouse with their teams. The plan was precise. Caroline would enter first to prepare the children, then the tactical team would surround the location while she created an internal diversion that would allow for the simultaneous rescue of all the victims. Caroline infiltrated the warehouse exactly as planned, using the same route as the night before. The place was quieter than before, with only 2 guards visibly making lazy rounds. She reached the area where the children slept without being detected. Julia, she whispered, gently touching her friend's shoulder, wake up, but don't make a sound. Julia opened her eyes slowly, still under the effect of the medication, but she managed to recognize Caroline. Carol, what are you doing here? They'll catch you. Not if we get them first. Listen carefully. I brought the real police, not the crooked ones from around here. In an hour, they're going to raid this place and get everyone out. Caroline spent the next 40 minutes silently waking each child and explaining the plan. The initial reaction was disbelief. After all, these were children who had been let down by the system so many times they no longer believed in salvation. But Caroline's determination and confidence were contagious. When I give the signal, she explained to the group, you run to the spots I showed you on the drawing. Don't look back. Don't stop to grab anything. Just run. At 5:45 in the morning, Caroline received confirmation via the transmitter that the tactical team was in position. It was time to create the diversion that would allow for the coordinated entry of the law enforcement team. The plan was simple but risky. Caroline would activate the warehouse's fire alarm system, creating enough confusion for the guards to disperse and the children to run to the predetermined escape points. But as Caroline made her way to the alarm panel, she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. "Hello, little Caroline. What a surprise to find you here again." Mendoza was standing at the entrance to the children's area, flanked by 4 armed men. His smile was colder and crueler than Caroline had ever seen. "You know, after your Mr. Charles's little visit last night, we started to suspect something wasn't right." Mendoza approached slowly. "So we decided to watch his house. Imagine our surprise when we saw federal agents coming and going." Caroline tried to remain calm, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The plan had been discovered. Mendoza knew everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," Caroline tried, but her voice betrayed her nervousness. "Oh, my dear, you're too smart for that kind of lie," Mendoza signaled to his men, who began to surround the other children. "In fact, your intelligence is precisely the problem. You've seen too much, you know too much." Through the hidden transmitter, Marina and Lucas heard the entire conversation. The operation was compromised, and Caroline and the other children were in immediate danger. "All units, move in now," Marina ordered over the radio. "The op is compromised. Top priority, safety of the children." In the warehouse, Mendoza continued his sinister monologue. "You've caused a lot of trouble, Caroline. Far more trouble than one child is worth. But don't worry, we've found special clients who pay extra for problematic children." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Caroline shouted, running toward the alarm panel. She managed to activate the system before the men could reach her. Immediately, deafening sirens began to blare, and red lights flooded the warehouse. In the ensuing chaos, the children ran to the escape points as planned, but Caroline couldn't get away. One of Mendoza's men grabbed her by the arm, lifting her off the ground as she kicked and screamed. "Now you're going to pay for all this trouble," Mendoza said, his mask of civility completely gone. It was at that moment that the warehouse doors burst open and the tactical team swarmed the location, with Marina at the front yelling, "FBI, nobody move!" The final confrontation had begun. The shootout that followed lasted only a few minutes, but to Caroline it felt like an eternity. Dangling from the arm of Mendoza's henchman, she watched the police raid with a mixture of terror and hope. Marina led the operation with military precision, while Lucas coordinated the rescue of the children who were running for the predetermined escape points. "Let the girl go!" Marina shouted, her weapon aimed directly at the man holding Caroline. "There's no way out for you!" Mendoza, even cornered, tried one last desperate ploy. "Detective, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We are a legally chartered charitable organization. These children are in our care by court order." "A forged court order," Lucas retorted, appearing from the opposite side with documents in his hand. "We've already checked. Your entire operation is based on forged paperwork." Caroline seized a moment of the henchman's distraction to bite his hand with all her might. The man yelled in pain and let her go, allowing her to run toward Marina. Immediately, 3 officers surrounded the criminal, who surrendered without a fight. "It's okay, little warrior," Marina said, giving Caroline a protective hug. "You were very brave." "Did the other kids get out?" Caroline asked, still trembling with adrenaline. "All of them. They're all safe, thanks to your plan." Marina smiled with pride. "Now it's our turn to take care of you." Mendoza was arrested along with his accomplices, but even in handcuffs, he maintained an arrogant smirk. "You have no idea the size of the operation you're trying to dismantle. We are just a small part of something much bigger." "Maybe," Lucas said, approaching him, "but every tall building crumbles when you remove the right foundations." As the criminals were led away, Caroline had an emotional reunion with Julia and the other children. Despite the trauma they had endured, they all showed impressive resilience and infinite gratitude for their newfound freedom. "Carol, you're the bravest kid I know," Julia said, hugging her friend. "You really saved us." "We saved ourselves, Ju, together." Caroline smiled, but her thoughts were already on another urgent concern. "Mr. Charles, what about Grandma Elaine?" Charles, who had arrived on the scene as soon as the operation was complete, hugged Caroline as if he hadn't seen her in years. "It's all taken care of, little one. Your grandmother's surgery has been rescheduled for today. The best cardiologists in Chicago are already getting everything ready." "Really? Really? And do you know the first thing she said when she heard you were safe?" Charles smiled. That she was proud to have such a brave granddaughter. In the weeks that followed, the rescue operation gained national attention. The human trafficking network run by Mendoza was completely dismantled, resulting in the arrest of dozens of criminals and the liberation of more than 60 children across the country. Caroline became a little national hero, but she preferred the tranquility of the new life she was building. Charles had officially started the adoption process, and she finally had what she had always dreamed of, a real family. Mrs. Elaine recovered completely from her heart surgery and now lived in Charles's house, caring for Caroline and helping with the adjustment of the other rescued children who were temporarily staying with the new, improvised family. "You know, Grandma," Caroline said one sunny afternoon as she played in the garden with Julia and 2 other girls still awaiting placement with adoptive families, "I think everything happened the way it was supposed to." "What do you mean, my little one?" Mrs. Elaine asked, watching the children play. "If I hadn't ended up on the street, I wouldn't have met Mr. Charles. If I hadn't met him, we wouldn't have saved all those kids." Caroline stopped playing and looked thoughtfully at the sky. "Sometimes bad things happen so that very good things can be born." Charles, who was listening to the conversation from the porch, felt his eyes well up. This extraordinary girl had changed not only his life, but also the lives of dozens of other children. She had transformed his individual compassion into a force capable of bringing down an entire criminal organization. "Mr. Charles," Caroline ran to him, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, little one. Do you regret stopping to help me that rainy day?" Charles scooped her into his arms, looking directly into her bright eyes. "Caroline, that was the best day of my life. It was the day I learned what it really means to be rich." "And what does it mean?" "It means having a family that loves you and people to care for. It means using what you have to protect those in need." He hugged her tightly. "It means having a brave daughter like you." Caroline smiled, finally at peace. The rain that had brought so much suffering had also brought the greatest blessing of their lives. 6 months after that life-altering encounter, in the rain, Caroline was running through the garden of a mansion, transformed into a home. What was once an empty, cold house now overflowed with life, laughter, and love. The walls that once reflected only the echo of lonely footsteps now echoed with children's voices, loving conversations, and the sounds of a real family. The Carolina Albright Foundation had been officially inaugurated the previous week, on the exact spot where the cardboard box that was once the girls' home had stood. The community center was a dream come true, a safe space where vulnerable children received education, food, medical care, and most importantly, love and dignity. "Mr. Charles, come see," Caroline shouted from the center's entrance, where a golden plaque gleamed in the morning sun. "The new sign is here." Charles walked over, reading aloud. "The Carolina Albright Child Protection Center, where every child finds a family." He smiled, running a hand through his adopted daughter's hair. "Do you like the name?" "I love it, but you know what I love more?" Caroline pointed to the children playing in the yard. Seeing that no kid will ever sleep in a cardboard box in this neighborhood again, Mrs. Elaine approached, her health fully restored and her smile more radiant than ever. "My little one, you've become a little revolutionary. I'm so proud." The opening ceremony was attended by Marina and Lucas, who had become close family friends. The detective had been promoted and now coordinated a national task force against human trafficking, directly inspired by the case Carolyn had helped solve. "You know your work led to the rescue of over 200 children across the country, right?" Marina said during her speech. Caroline proved that courage has no age and that one determined child can move mountains. Julia, now living with a loving family who had adopted her, ran up to Caroline. "Carol, remember when you promised me we'd get out of that horrible place?" "I remember." "You kept your promise. And now look." Julia pointed to the center, bustling with activity. "Hundreds of kids are going to have a better chance because of what you did." Caroline looked around, watching the children in art workshops, tutoring sessions, sports activities, and simply being kids in a safe environment. Every smile, every laugh, every hug was a victory against the cruelty that had once dominated these streets. "You know, Ju," Caroline said thoughtfully, "Grandma always said God works in mysterious ways. I think she was right." "How so?" "If I hadn't been through all that, I wouldn't have met Mr. Charles. If I hadn't met him, we wouldn't have saved you guys. And if we hadn't done all that, this place wouldn't exist." Caroline gestured to the center. "Sometimes suffering prepares us to do important things." During the afternoon, Caroline found a quiet moment in the room that had been specially prepared for her at the center. It was her private office, where she coordinated activities for the other children and kept her most precious treasures. Photos of her new family, letters from children helped by the foundation, and in a special corner, the original cardboard box, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Charles found her there, sitting on the floor next to the box, flipping through a photo album. "What are you thinking about, little one?" "I was remembering the first day we met. You were lost in the rain, looking for that bad man." Caroline smiled. "Who would have thought that being lost could be the best thing that ever happened to us?" "You know what I learned from you, Caroline?" Charles sat beside her. "That there's no such thing as chance. There's purpose. I wasn't lost that day. I was being guided to find you. And I wasn't begging for change. I was waiting for my family to arrive." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the children play in the yard through the window. It was a heartwarming sight. Dozens of little ones who now had hope, opportunities, and most importantly, the certainty that they were not alone in the world. "Mr. Charles," Caroline said finally, "thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for showing me what really matters in life. And what's that? Family, love, and using what we have to take care of those who need it." Charles hugged Caroline. "You taught me that true wealth isn't what we accumulate, but what we share." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in golden hues, the family gathered in the garden for dinner. Mrs. Elaine had prepared Caroline's favorite dish. Charles told funny stories from the office, and the girl talked excitedly about plans to expand the center to other neighborhoods. "You know what my biggest dream is?" Caroline said, her eyes shining with determination. "What's that?" Charles and Mrs. Elaine asked in unison. "That one day we won't need centers like this anymore because every child will already have a family that loves them." Caroline smiled. "Until then, we'll take care of every single one as if they were our own daughter, our own granddaughter, our own sister." That night, as Caroline slept peacefully in her bed, the same bed that had seemed an impossible dream months ago, Charles and Mrs. Elaine talked on the porch about their plans for the future. "She changed our lives forever," Charles said. "No," Mrs. Elaine corrected wisely. "She showed us who we always were on the inside. We just needed someone to teach us to be brave enough to love without limits." The gentle rain falling outside no longer brought sadness or despair. It was now a symbol of renewal, of second chances, and of the certainty that even in the darkest storms, there is always the possibility of a new dawn. Caroline had proven that a brave child, a compassionate heart, and the determination to do what is right can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Her story had become an inspiration for others to also have the courage to stop, look around, and extend a hand to those in need. Because in the end, we are all just people looking for a home. And sometimes that home isn't a place, but a family we choose to build with love, courage, and hope.